Welcome to the second Saturday program. Thank you for coming. Our speaker today will be Sergio Lugo. He'll be speaking on Mourning Covers and Stamps. I'd like to welcome Sergio Lugo.
Thank you for that introduction, Jim. I'm pleased to be here this morning and to provide you with this presentation on a subject that's very little known and very little explored. I'm going to start by introducing to you some of the sources for the slides and the scans that you see in this presentation. First, I'm going to start with my own sales stock. That began about 15-20 years ago when people began asking me for mourning covers, and I kept on being sold out. Now that's generally indicative to a stamp dealer that you're selling it too low and there's generally interest in it. And that has been part of the reason I've amassed so many of them, and as massive so many of them is roughly about 70 to 100 that I've got in my sales stock, which is probably more than most people have that show up at shows. A second source of the information I'm presenting this morning is from the magazine Mourning News, which is issued by the Mourning Stamp Cover Club. Okay, which was established about 2002, so 2003. They began with their periodical back around 2006. In this case, they supply the journal to all libraries, and we are fortunate to have all 40 or 45 issues that have been published since 2006. There is a third source of information that I use, and that's eBay. eBay consistently presents nearly 1,500 mourning covers on its webpage week to week. Of those 1,500 mourning covers, you'll find, for example, that roughly 300 of them are in the price range up to $11, meaning that there are 1,200 that are over $11. That doesn't mean they all sell, it doesn't mean that they all sell at that price. But you'll find that the prices that they request and the prices that they realize are remarkable. Okay? The last one I want to mention to you is the Philatelic Union Catalog. The Philatelic Union Catalog is maintained by the American Philatelic Research Library. It consists of the combined efforts of 17 philatelic libraries in the United States and worldwide. Those 17 libraries have shared their database and their listings on their holdings, and you can find in their search of their database nearly 200 articles on mourning covers. Many of those mourning cover articles are highly informative and go into a lot of discussion and items on aspects of mourning covers that we would never even think about. The most prominent of the books in the Union Catalog is the book, and you'll see it right there, Mourning News, Mourning Covers, published by Ernest Mosier. Specialists have a compulsion to organize and categorize everything. Mourning cover collectors and mourning stamp collectors are no exception to that rule. Okay? You'll find in an early listing about Volume 2 a listing of the 13 major categories of information that you can organize mourning covers and mourning stamps on. I am not going to go through all of them, but here are some of them. Time of posting, postal markings, shapes, other mourning cover types. You'll find that within those 13 categories, there are hundreds of subcategories that deal with mourning covers that you can further organize mourning covers and stamps on. So there's no lack of information for you to proceed on and to organize your material. Let me just say this with respect to my presentation. I was asked to give a presentation. I kind of didn't want to do the ones I've done in the past, so I came up with this, and I think people found it to be generally acceptable in terms of an idea or a concept. So what I've done is basically designed it based on my limited experiences, starting with my stock, and then you'll find one of the things that's really fascinating about mourning covers and stamps is there's a tremendous amount of postal history. involved in virtually every cover that you ever experience or run across. So in consequence, I had to spend more time doing research on things that I'd done in the past, reading more in preparation for this presentation. And then let's start with the definition of mourning stamps and covers. For covers, they are generally black-edged posted letters. They were especially popular or prevalent beginning in the 1840s and continuing until about 1970. You'll find that they are always generally harbingers of death and messengers of grief, if you want to put it that way. You'll find that they are always generally characterized by a marking of some kind that's in black. And you'll also find that there have been 250 jurisdictions that have issued mourning stamps or covers in the postal history of the world since the 1840s. Stamps look a little different. They have black mourning marks of one kind or another. They are generally issued within 18 months of the death of a public figure. And that's the definition. But I want to remind you that purists' definitions don't necessarily apply, especially as times change, cultures change, mores change, and things along that line. So here we have an example of a modern mourning cover. And this particular mourning cover is dedicated to one Robin Williams. I think you can remember who he is as an actor. Now, just as a question for you, who was the most popular couple in Boulder, Colorado in the late 1970s and the early 1980s? Anybody?
Mork and Mindy.
Mork and Mindy. All right, you all remember Mork and Mindy, right? Where was Mork from, by the way? Ork! All right, that's an example of a mourning cover and some of the irrelevancies you can bring in outside of the purist point of view. Now, you'll also find that there are older covers that don't quite meet the definitions. You don't see a black edge here, but you see a black commemorative cachet. This would be hard to place into a mourning cover, except it is dedicated especially for that purpose. This particular cover was printed on the day of the crash of the USS Macon. The USS Macon crashed off the coast of California. There were about 76 crewmen, many of them were rescued, except for, I think, 3 to 5 that died in the accident. Question for you. What was the other airship that crashed that same year?
Akron.
The USS Akron. The USS Akron, on the other hand, experienced heavy casualties of its crew of about 76. 70 of them, or 72, were killed in the crash. Okay? Again, I'm just using it as an example of something that is not quite black edge, doesn't quite meet the definition, but is still printed or available for that purpose. But let's not get hung up on some of the exceptions. Let's go ahead and back to the main points of these stamps and covers, and that is commemoration of someone or some personalities who have passed away, died suddenly, or whom we want to commemorate. Let's start with the stamps. They can be black-edged, as you can see here. You'll see examples from throughout the world, and I'll just mention a couple of them for you. There's at the top, Queen Astrid of Belgium. You'll see at the bottom center, one for a Canadian Minister of the Interior who was killed in 1970-71 by Quebec separatists. The black border is not a black border as such, it's the mount that I used on that particular stamp. But he was killed in 1971 and the Canadian government decided to issue a mourning stamp for him. At the upper right, you'll see the Hindenburg Memorial Stamps, or mourning stamps of the 1934, following the death of President Hindenburg of Germany. I'm going to focus in on United States mourning stamps. And as I point out here, they are not necessarily black in color. You'll see that the Warren G. Harding at the left and the Abraham Lincoln at the right are in black. But in stark contrast in the center is Franklin D. Roosevelt. You all are familiar with that 4-issue set of stamps that was published 5 months after the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And in this particular one, it's purple. Below it, you'll see the stamp issued in memory of and mourning for John F. Kennedy. This one is slightly blue in color, and in this particular one, it was used on a memorial cover to him. So again, the definitions don't necessarily quite apply relative to such stamps. Further, you'll find stamps that are mistaken as memorial or mourning covers, but are not. And the main determinant here is the distinction of 18 months following the death of that public personages. The left one is the Jackson stamp of 1860-61. This is issued, and it's numbered to 73. This is issued 18 years, I believe, after his death in 1845. At the right-hand side, you'll see the stamp for President McKinley. That's also in black, and this one's issued nearly 22 years after McKinley's death. That fact doesn't preclude the stamps from being used on mourning covers, as in the one down below. That one is from the 1860-61 period. It shows the Andrew Jackson stamp and is obviously a memorial or mourning cover. Now, I'd like to mention something to you so that you're aware of this. To the extent that I could, I tried to put at the end of the covers or the citation where I got the stamps or covers from, okay? And this particular one is eBay. Finally, I'll mention something that is in the way of Cinderellas that are considered mourning labels. Some of you may have seen this set. It was published in 1920-21 by an unknown printer, and it memorializes or it mourns the loss of the 19 German colonies resulting from the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. These are very often seen in dealers' materials and are popular as a set. The set runs for anywhere from about $20 to $30, and in this particular instance, you've got a label commemorating German Southwest Africa, and you'll see the illustration up there pointing to the one down below. As an aside, I'll mention something else to you that's not quite in the vein of memorial covers. The materials for the German Overseas Empire were so popular and so short of supply after the Treaty of Versailles that the German government, the post office, printed postal cards for the Hohenzollern issue of the German Empire, and they sold out quickly in 1919-1920. They are virtually indistinguishable from the original postal cards that were issued. Mourning covers have a pedigree going back into the 1500s. The earliest references to them are in references to the mail carried by turn-in taxes. However, mourning covers were not generally saved until the beginning of the 1700s. After that, they begin peppering the mails and begin picking up usage at the turn of the 1800s as the Industrial Revolution sets in Great Britain, and stationers are able to provide and supply such mourning covers to buyers throughout the British Isles. Here are some that are stampless in nature. At the left, you'll see one in 1838, which is being sent to an attorney in Piccadilly. This is the front and reverse. The most distinguishable characteristic for this particular cover, as far as I'm concerned, is the red marking, which is free cancellation. One of the impetuses for Rowland Hill's reform of the system in Great Britain was kind of wanted to put an end to the usage of free franking by every sort of royalty and hanger-on that existed. This is not unusual to see these kinds of free markings on envelopes from the late 1830s and early 1840s. In the center is one from New York to attorney in Canada in 1846. I have not been able to figure out what the marking is for 1/4, that circular marking of 1/4, and this was an item that I located on eBay and I wanted to show. At the right-hand side is a cover from 1831, which is a British folded letter, and it wouldn't be otherwise noticeable as a mourning cover except for the black seal and the black line across on the reverse. Other examples were as stationers began being able to provide these materials to people that were in mourning, they became fancier and somewhat more elaborate and somewhat more popular. The top left-hand side is one from 1842, and it's an Abingdon cover from an attorney in, I couldn't make out the name, a Hummers, a Humors, or something like this, franked with the 1841 1-penny Red Scott, number 3. It is also canceled with the Maltese cross in this instance. This is a year. When do we generally consider that postage stamps became available? 1840? I tend to believe it's 1840. So this one is within a year of the issuance of postage stamps by the government. At the right-hand side is a very elaborate ladies' card, and the elaboration results from the fringe that was printed in lace on this particular cover. And at the bottom left is an 1843 example of another penny red to Aylesbury from, as I remember the reverse, another attorney. Let's not jump to conclusions as to why mourning covers were used. You can find in looking at the inserts, and the inserts play a real key here. You'll find that a lot of inserts are not available. For whatever reason, they were removed, put away in a stock book, destroyed, or thrown out. So you need the inserts to a certain extent to prove the purpose of the mourning cover. 4 purposes can generally be identified in the purpose of the mourning cover. An announcement of death. Condolences, secondly, from a friend or acquaintances. Thirdly, a thank you for having written and taken notice and to write the family. And fourth, an invitation to the funeral. There are multiple reasons that mourning covers were sent and used, and those are the 4 that I've been able to identify. I don't know if there are any others, but there were more than just, a notification of death. Here you'll find certain examples of each one of those, and again, either the contents prove the reason or something about the covers proves the reason. In the bottom left-hand side, you'll find 2 that I have. It's in my stock. They were sent to a gentleman by the name of Rainville. Mr. Rainville was from Brazil. He was a psychologist, a psychiatrist who had studied in Europe, had gone to Europe. He receives 2 mourning notices or mourning covers with his stay in Europe, separated by about 6 to 8 months. So in this instance, I could not tell if they were condolences of some kind or announcements of some kind. Mr. Rainville eventually settles here in Littleton, Colorado, and he founds an institute that developed to mental health, which was apparently heavily used in the 1930s and 1940s. The next example you'll see is to a town called Meadville, Pennsylvania. And this one, it particularly thanks the recipient of the letter for having taken notice or sent a notice or come to the funeral or something along this line. It was basically a thank you, and it's framed in a mourning cover. The next one is from 1892. You'll notice immediately that it bears a Columbian issue of the 1892 period, and it's from St. Peters, Pennsylvania, to Parker, and it's announcing the death of a member of the family in that particular instance. And the final one at the right is a mourning cover containing a number of materials, and it was just basically for the daughter of this family, and it was just marking that she had died and provided some information with respect to her obituary and a mourning card that was distributed at her funeral. Such mourning cards are kind of typical, I think you may recognize, of Roman Catholics. I don't believe you'll find too many other faiths that use those mourning cards as heavily as Roman Catholics do. At this point, any questions that you'd like to explore? Yes, Tony.
Every country is probably different, but as far as I remember, in Belgium, for instance, a mourning notice was in the shape like a fold-open envelope. And it was an obituary what was in there from the person, where he was born, age and all that, when the funeral was going to be. It was closed and not sealed. And then you could mail it by third-class mail, and it went by express mail for delivery. Then if you received an answer from it, that was a regular black bordered envelope with a note in, sorry for your loss and this and that. And that went on till the late 70s because the post office would not do express mail anymore for third class
mail.
Mail.
Yes.
So, and that is in Belgium, of course.
Yes.
So I don't know. I have seen some from France and Germany too, but in Belgium that was heavily that way.
Tony has just anticipated one of my presentations here, and I'm glad you did. No problem, Tony, okay? I was demonstrating this yesterday, practicing it 2 days ago, and the lady from the Postcard Club was here, and she was from a small town in Missouri. Her small town and her parents operated the general store. The general store received exactly the kind of notices that you talked about and were distributed and posted publicly. She kept a record of them and provided them to the Historical Society because she didn't know what else to do with them. But they were very much these large ones. And you'll find that there was another purpose to them as well. You didn't touch upon them, but we're going to get to it in a minute. Is that okay, Tony?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You'll see it. You'll be amazed when you realize why it was that size. Size doesn't matter. Near as I can figure out, size has nothing to do with the mourning cover. Now, certain testimonials in the 1900s, at the beginning of the 1900s, that I'll mention in a minute as I get to it, assert that the larger the border, the more important the person was. Now, I think these were a bunch of people that were disgruntled with the idea of having mourning covers stained by a black border, okay? Because that seems to be the idea that they're conveying, that they didn't like them. They didn't like them because of their size, for no other reason than some alleged reason. But it doesn't seem to matter whatsoever in terms of the sizes. Now, unfortunately, a scan like this condenses everything down and doesn't give you the true size or impression of the mourning cover and of the black markings. So I've tried to do it this way to just illustrate the sizes, but not the actual envelope itself. Number one is a cover from Guatemala with about medium-size borders. Just to the right of it is one from the United States with a very thin border. To the right is the type of cover that Tony was just mentioning. Very thick border, and it's a folded mourning card. To the bottom left, cover enclosure of Austria. And to the right, bottom is one of a Confederate nature, sent from Petersburg, Virginia to Norfolk. And that was a Confederate cover with a thin margin. Now, there seems to be an exception to the matter of covers and their corners and their markings, etc. At the turn of the century, around 1900, 1910, there was a mourning cover that was introduced in Europe, and it only seems to have occurred in Europe, that were known as corner announcements. And the corner was the one that was blackened, and that seemed to be a reason for that, and the reason seemed to be to make the presentation of a mourning cover more elegant. The testimonials that you'll read about and that are contained in the centerpiece, that centerpiece is an article from the Morning News, discusses the issuance of these corner covers and includes about 25 testimonials from publishers and users in which they denounced the quote-unquote ugliness of big black borders. It was more refined to be looking at this than to be dealing with something grotesque. And that seems to be the only reason that people might have disliked them. Anyway, the court covers were one solution to that issue, and you'll see 3 examples here. From Austria, from Great Britain, and the one at the right is also from Great Britain. Now, this is the example of the mourning cover that Tony was mentioning. This was the center, this was unfolded. You look at Morning News, you're reading through it, and you're reading through it, and you're reading through it. It was also prevalent in Poland, Tony, as well as Belgium. And I don't know about the rest of the world, but Poland had them as well. And the article discusses a bicyclist traveling through Poland, stopping by a church, looking at a bulletin board at the church, and guess what's on the bulletin board? These announcements, fully laid out and fully spread out. So it appears that these poster-type mourning covers serve the dual purpose of letting you know that this had happened in the family and letting the public know, and the members of the parish, of the death of the individual. Okay, it was a fascinating little article about why. Go ahead, Tony.
The Catholic parts of Europe, Belgium is complete Catholic.
Yes, Poland
Germany
is.
and Poland, and Germany little, northern France. Each and every Catholic church over there has a bulletin board like that on the right-hand side, right behind the bell tower on the outside of the church.
Mm-hmm.
That's where all the notices were hung out for the funerals, the baptismals, and the weddings.
Yes.
And that is where people came to see if somebody had died, so they would go to the service, or if there was a baptismal, or if somebody got married, and then they would go there too, of course. But each and every church, because the church from the little town where I was born for the moment, it is there, but it doesn't work as a church anymore. Not enough people are there anymore. But it is still used, the bulletin board, for notices if something goes on in the parish.
Well, it was a fascinating insight into the use of these things, and I was just pleased as punch to run into that article. Okay, the backsides. The backsides equally don't have any consequence. Okay? This is an example of the backsides. Now, they do have a consequence to certain artists to want to take all those backsides and make a graphic illustration of them on a wall. And this is what the gentleman did. The gentleman was on old mags. He titled it, "When Mourning Covers Become Art." It's notification 13, and you can find it on the web page that I have cited there. And it's a full wall with these magnified rear sides of the covers. Okay, and you can see some illustrations of the back sides of them. Okay, we've already said that contents and inserts do matter because they do provide the information about the decedent and or aspects of the decedent's life. The inserts drive up the value, okay, of mourning covers is one thing I've discovered. And here we have certain examples. You'll see at the left-hand side, one from Austria containing a letter, and it's of course written in German or some kind of version of Austrian that I can't translate, but I assume it's talking about the family. In the center is one from the United States, and that particular insert is in black, as you can see there, and it talks about the lady and a little bit about her life. And this is, it kind of concludes, she's just sleeping, okay? At the right-hand side is one from 1922 from Reading, Pennsylvania, talking about the decedent. At the bottom left is a letter from the Netherlands. You can't quite make it out in this instance, but the background, the white in the background, is a letter about the lady. Then you have a typographed or typed letter, a mimeographed letter about the lady. There's a card dedicated to her, and then, of course, the envelope. And finally, you have an example from France in around 1926, as I remember, talking about the decedent. Religious cards or remembrances are important, talking about the decedent, and this again is big among Catholics, except I don't understand what the center one is. On the left you find one from 1922, a mourning card, a memorial card that was inserted in the cover for Frances, and I cannot pronounce her last name. And then on the right is the one we showed you earlier. Memorial cards have really changed in this regard with respect to modern day culture. The modern day cultures avoid the black and tend to go into color illustrations of the saints and various religious objects. In the center is one that I can't figure out. There's nothing in there that tells me why that particular card was inserted into the Hindenburg mourning cover. I believe it just is something to the effect of farewell and nice knowing you, but that's all it says, and there's nothing else in this particular mourning cover to discuss it. We've talked about specialists and their specialty categories and how there was absolutely no way that I could cover all of this stuff. So I'm not going to try, but I am going to give you some illustrations of specialty covers and then specialty collections, and then closing it out with a potpourri, if you will, of covers that you will find that fit into certain collecting interests. I'm beginning with mourning covers as presidential remembrances. This is a specialty collection that people like to get into and follow. You'll find an example there from President Harrison. It's franked in 1889. At the bottom right is one from 1923 or 24 for President Warren G. Harding as mourning cover in the stamp. In the center is one for President Herbert Hoover that appears not to have been completed or mailed. In this particular instance, the insert tells you that it was produced by the Cedar Rapids Stamp Club in memory of President Hoover. In contrast, you'll find that there's a specialty collecting arena of mourning covers dealing with the franks, the free franks of presidential widows. Of those presidential widows, I think you'll count that they've found or discovered 13 types of presidential widows frankings. Florence Harding was the most prolific of these widows who would send out mourning covers in response to people. And this is one illustrating her sign-off of refranking at the time. One of the ones that you don't see here and which totally surprised me was Eleanor Roosevelt. But given the circumstances, I think you can understand maybe she wasn't too sorry about the passing of FDR. Specialty collecting interests include Confederates, and you'll find lots of Confederate material. I think you all know that the Civil War took the greatest toll of American soldiers, American men, of any war, 630,000, of which the sides were evenly divided, basically, with the Confederates losing about 300,000 men in the space of 4 years. This top one is one that I had and that I sold, and it was from Petersburg, Virginia to Norfolk. It is canceled with a Confederate provisional. You will not find that Confederate provisional in Scots. But if you go to the book that I cite there, Confederate States of America, Stampless Covers, published in 1983, you will find the exact cancellation there, that provisional stamp there. I was really confused at this particular one because I thought it was in 1865 when Petersburg was under siege by Union forces in February and March. It was not, someone pointed out to me, Sergio, this is an early example of 1862, and it's a legitimate cover as far as they were concerned. The reason I mention that is you will find frequently there were so many stamps left over and covers left over that fakes and forgeries could be manufactured by people that wanted to take advantage of people that were collecting mourning covers. In these two instances, once you look at them quickly and you'll find them on eBay, you'll find that the stamps are absolutely not tied to the cover. Now that's not in and of itself an indication of fakes and forgeries, but it just generally is a good idea that is a fake and forgery that in, for example, at the left-hand one, Canaba or Cahaba, Alabama, the stamp is there and the cancellation is there and they're miles apart on the cover. Okay? The same thing is also true for the one on the right, up on the upper left-hand corner, and the cancellation is down in the right-hand corner. So they tend to lead me to believe that if you buy them, it's buyer beware as to what you're buying. Some other specialty collecting interests include censored covers. Censored covers as mourning covers are among the most heavily seen of mourning covers. Very typically used during wars. You'll find that the left-hand side, this one from Italy in 1916 being sent to someone in the United States. At the right-hand side, you'll see one opened by the French authorities on a Uruguayan cover sent in World War I to Switzerland. And that one was going to, as I remember, the American Red Cross. Don't hold me to that. But it was opened by the French and sealed. The seal at the top is a tape, unusual from that particular destination, by the way. At the center is one that is really odd to me, and I maybe have stretched it a little bit. At the top is a sealing mark by the Germans. At first I thought this was a censor strip, but you'll find that the Germans use strips of different kinds for different purposes. Some of them were for currency control. And I believe that one was for currency control. Because typically, you'll see on the bottom one, the strip of tape that was used, that was really a censor mark on the part of Army headquarters or whatever Army units were responsible for this. This bottom one, I think I took a little bit of a stretch on because I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. Couldn't figure out why this seal was on the back. And the back seal is one from July 1940. And this is very unusual to see these kinds of seals for these countries. Now, you got to go into your history. And pretty soon you realize that Denmark is conquered by the Germans in June and July of 1940. They installed their own puppet government. And I think the seal was attached in mourning for the death of Denmark. So it's allegorical in nature. But as with anything, this kind of speculation is always subject to question by anybody. But this one was one that I found very interesting and that I included in here because that seal doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me otherwise, being out of time for the use of those seals. Other specialty collecting areas included what you've seen, sometimes you've seen them, is collars. This was another way of dealing with this elegance issues, of making it look more pretty, making it look less heavily mourning in nature. The left one from Canada, 1905, and the right one is from Malta, 1902, and that's a Queen Victoria stamp. You'll see various collars like this that are really elegant in nature. Another specialty collecting area that you'll find is ladies' cards. If you've seen ladies' cards, you'll see that they're generally no higher than 2 inches by 4 inches. They're about generally 1/5 the size of a normal number 6 envelope that we typically use here in the United States. And so mourning covers became especially an area for stationers to focus in on because they realized that women wanted dainty products for their males, okay? And you'll find them used heavily that way by women. At the left-hand side is one from Chicago, and you'll find that one from eBay. The next one is from 1878, and it actually included the enclosure. The next one is only shown because you generally do not find family initials or family markings on the reverse of the envelope. You will generally not find this to be the case with mourning covers. And in this instance, it's the initials W, and I have no idea who this family was because there's nothing else to tell me who their name was. And finally, at the right-hand side, the last one is a ladies' cover from 1854. This one goes into a lot of detail with a lot of markings and the British Post Office of 184, which you can find and trace easily. And finally, the seal on the back side. Another specialty collecting area is postage due. Now, I spent some time looking for these, and then all of a sudden I found several of them. But as I told several people, I found it funny that someone had to pay postage due to receive a condolence or announcement, letter from somebody, okay? That they had to pay double this postage rate for receipt of that particular cover. The upper left-hand example says more to pay in the upper left-hand corner, and it's got the 2. The cover in the center is a postage due example from Italy to Canada via Great Britain. The postage due of 2 pence appears to have been paid in London, England, as evidenced by the circular red paid marking. And then there's another one from the 1840s where 2-cent postage due was charged. By the 1920s, postage due stamps had been introduced. Now, normally, we would think that you had a chintzy individual that was sending a letter, okay, and was expecting the recipient to pay for it. But there is an explanation that goes beyond that. I'm not saying that there weren't chintzy individuals. What happened was many mourning letters, mourning covers, were sent as printed matter, and they paid the lesser fair rate for printed matter. Because many of them were open, as you said earlier, Tony, the postal clerk could open it and see that it was a letter or a message that included in the mourning cover. Therefore, the postage due was charged on the base of the higher rate, not the printed matter rate. So there seems to be an explanation that goes a little bit beyond chintziness. Another specialty collecting area are seals. This is one from eBay, from the Department of State, for the death of President McKinley. And in this particular instance, there is a black seal commemorating President McKinley's death embossed in the seal of the United States. This particular one, the gentleman wants around $1,200 for it, and I believe he'll get it. Now, we're talking now about specialty collecting that's focused on mourning cover types and unusual applications. So these basically would fit into someone's collection, and you can find these things of all kinds throughout the mourning cover world. At the left-hand side is an unusual card from Germany in the 1934 period. It's a postal card. I don't know what the word says, but it's a postal card that was apparently printed to order with a mourning border on it. You rarely see postal cards with mourning notes on them. At the bottom left is a window envelope. I cannot make out what the purpose of it was. I don't know if the company was involved in dealing with mourning covers and materials, but this is an unusual one, and there's nothing in it to suggest to me what it was used for. If you're into railroad postal history and railroad post offices, the top center cover is one that was processed on a New York line back in 1905, 1906. If you're interested in other subjects and things that would fit into your collections, you can get postal telegrams, which is at the bottom center. I've seen postal telegrams here for Poland, and I've also seen postal telegrams for Argentina, which means to me that there are more than one country or two countries that use postal telegrams in a mourning cover capacity. At the bottom right, it's an unusual one because they're quite ordinary. And by the way, I picked them up last week from the auction. The guy that, Webster got the auction. I asked him if I could buy them, and looked at him and said, yeah, I'll sell them to you for $1 each. I said, okay, I'll buy them. I got home and I started looking at them closely and I couldn't make sense of it. These are two mourning covers to the same family, separated by something like 4 months, the postal dates. They're almost sent from the exact same place in New York City, which tells me that one of them might have been an announcement and another one might have been a thank you 2 or 3 or 4 months later. Or it may have been a second death in the family. You just don't know. You just don't know without that insert. The top one is an unusual one because I happened to pick it up in a lot, looking through it and said, I'm putting it away. I usually don't like necessarily reading the contents of these letters, of any of these people's correspondence. But this one I happened to open up, and bango, it's a mourning cover. All of it is, it's a folded letter from 1854 that is outlined on the periphery with black markings. Other areas that can fit into people's collections are these. If you happen to like collecting flag cancels, mourning covers were very, very popular during the period when flag cancels were issued by the American National Stamp Publishing Company or whatever it was. If you happen to be into catapults and Judaica, the next one down on the left-hand side is a letter to Brazil sent from Germany, and it's sent to a committee dealing with Israel. And I'm not sure what their purpose was in Brazil. If you're into fancy cancellations, there's an example at the lower left-hand side of fancy cancellations on mourning covers, and this particular one is an anchor. If you like collecting material related to world leaders, you'll find that the top center one is one for the death of Pius XI, of the Catholic Pope in 1939. And this was an announcement being sent to the parishioners and members throughout the world. At the bottom, if you happen to be interested in specific countries, aside from, say, the United States, France, and Great Britain, you can see this one at the bottom from Ireland, using a Great Britain stamp in 1862. And that particular stamp was identified as plate number 1. And, finding those plate numbers are really hard to find on those Great Britain issues. At the upper right-hand side, you'll see that certain people like collecting certain stamps, and you'll have special delivery stamps on this particular one, and Scott number 318. Why a special delivery stamp was needed was beyond me. Maybe they wanted to get it to the family in a hurry. That's the only reason, to pay the extra 10 cents is, it just catches you by surprise to see that. And finally, for any of you that like collecting bisects, you see an example there from Spain in 1936. And being an announcement of probably death, the person was probably trying to save money if they were sending out a lot of announcements to people throughout the world. And so bisect made sense. Some other aspects, and this is just called a potpourri of collecting focused on stamps. You can see the example at the upper left-hand side. The first issue of the United States Printing Office Bureau of Engraving and Printing from 1892. If you're interested in cancellations, at the bottom left, a Doremus cancellation from about the same period, 1892. From 25, 30 years later, a very unusual one, and I can't believe that there are very many of them out there, a mourning cover using the Kansas-Nebraska stamp. And at the bottom right is the one that you'll see tons of in the United States. Every variety of a Washington Franklin that you can find will be found on mourning covers from that period. Let's talk about the value, and we're almost at the conclusion. The only thing I can base my experiences on is what I've sold over the years, and like I told you, if you amass them and you get them and they're being sold out quickly, it usually tells you something. Your prices are too low, is what it comes back and tells you. So I've raised them over the years. I keep on getting sold out on them. So there's a lot of demand for mourning cards, mourning covers. I was just telling somebody I sold 3 of them down in New Mexico, and we won't get into the pricing that I sold them, but it was substantially above the sale prices that I charged 10, 15 years ago. You can find them in auction catalogs. You can find them on eBay. I already told you about the ones that you can find on eBay and what they generally are being asked for. And you need to go to the completed ones or the sold ones to see what they're actually selling for. But you'll find numbers above $30, $40, $50 that are being sold. A number of them get up to the hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And here's an example I picked up from eBay, I think it was. It was certified by the American Philatelic Society. It had been signed by Queen Emma of Hawaii, and she was sending this particular mourning cover to an acquaintance, and it had a price of $4,500. So death and dying ain't cheap, if you want to put it that way. I want to close with my final one. Mourning Covers and Stamps. I introduced you to Robin Williams on. The first one is a mourning cover that doesn't quite fit. You all know that Mork and Mindy were the show, and he was from Ork. He always closed his show with one statement. He'd always communicate with Orson and tell you about Orson and these earthlings that he didn't quite understand. And he couldn't quite figure out what they were doing and how they were processing things, etc. It's a great little moral story, the show on that. Can any of you tell me what he closed the show with? Nanu, Nanu. On behalf of the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library, I'd like to thank you for having taken the time to visit with us on this video. You'll find that this is one of a number of videos that we've produced over the years in the effort to provide educational services to the stamp collecting public. The Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library is located in Denver, Colorado at 2038 South Pontiac Way. Our hours are 10 to 4, 5 days a week, with 1 day of extended hours. The library offers collectors of every kind and to the general public a host of materials that are related to stamp collecting and world history. There are over 60,000 journals contained in 800 specific journals. We have a map room, we have special collections devoted to individual countries, and we have special libraries that are devoted to individual countries. For further information about the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library, we invite you to visit the library or visit us online at our website.
So I'll catch you on the rebound, your magnitude. Until next week, Nanu, Nanu.